Eve had been working as a nurse in the West Wing of Orlando General Hospital for 6 months. At 32 years old, and after leaving her family behind in Texas, the young woman had carved out a career as an excellent nurse's aide. Her specialty was cardiology and palliative care for chronically ill elderly patients. Her work was her passion, her whole life. She could work 12 hours a day without complaint and still be just as efficient, which is why everyone loved her, and hospitals sought her out to be part of their teams. Since graduating and doing her fellowship in Texas, Eve had been going back and forth non-stop. Her goal was to gain maximum experience and earn the trust of the best doctors in the country, so she could continue to move up the ladder. Finally, after many years of relentless work and a lot of sleeplessness, her big break came. Well, actually, two. There were 2 openings, one as a cardiac nurse assistant at Orlando General Hospital and one as a nurse manager at New York Hospital. Anyone in her place would have jumped for joy and chosen the job offer in New York without batting an eyelash, since she was offered better conditions and a position as boss. It was everything she had been fighting for so many years. But Eve didn't choose it. The reason? A world-renowned doctor who only worked at the Orlando Hospital and whose assistant she could be, Dr. Daniel Jordan. This surgeon was an eminence in his work, and Eve had followed his career since she decided to become a nurse. It could be said that she became a nurse because of this man, since she had the chance to work with him and learn from the best. How could she refuse? What could go wrong? It was her life's dream. But sometimes dreams are not what they seem, and what inspires us is nothing more than a lie behind which hides the harsh reality. And Eve was about to find out. Upon her arrival at the hospital in Orlando, Eve found the work environment to be anything but peaceful. The hospital was in chaos, a kind of battlefield in which the nurses played the role of soldiers who contained the crises and facilitated the work and life of the doctors. The first few weeks were very hard, but when she spent the first month there, her body seemed to get used to the speed of life in that hospital. Dr. Jordan turned out to be as pleasant and engaging as she had imagined. Watching him work was inspiring, and every time she saw him save the life of a patient who had given up on life, Eve remembered why she was there and had given up working anywhere else. That doctor was an eminence and deserved all her respect. But soon all that was going to change, and the person she most admired in the world was to become the villain of the story. It all started with the arrival of a new patient at the hospital, an elderly black man with severe heart problems and minor angina, 84-year-old Harry Brown. A seemingly ordinary patient. There are hundreds of similar cases in hospitals, but it would end up becoming something much more important for everyone, especially for Eve and her mentor, Dr. Jordan. Eve had visited Mr. Brown several times during her first week at the hospital, assisting Dr. Jordan in preparing him for a delicate heart operation that could extend his life and prevent further heart attacks. Throughout her visits, Eve had found Dr. Daniel to be as friendly and professional as she had always imagined. He seemed to be the kind of person who always has a smile and a comforting word for anyone who needs it. Or so it seemed to her. Mr. Harry Brown was a lovely old man who seemed to be very lonely and whose heart could fail at any moment. Every time she and the doctor came into his room to check on how he had spent the night, the old man would greet them with a big smile and thank them for all the care they were giving him. "You are my guardian angels. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be in this world right now. Although, come to think of it, maybe I should be gone by now, and I'm taking the place of someone younger, and with the capacity to continue doing something useful for this world," the old man once commented to them while they were cleaning his sheets, with a melancholic tone. Eve's heart cringed at that comment, and she was quick to contradict her patient to let him know how important it was that he continue to live. "Please, don't say that. Your life is as important as anyone else's. We make no distinctions to save anyone's life, no matter their age or any other factor. All we want is to heal people and give them more time to enjoy this world," Eve answered gently, while she changed the IV line. However, Dr. Jordan did not comment on the matter and just smiled coldly while he read some papers and signed them. Eve noticed her superior's silence and urged him to say something to reassure his patient. "Right, doctor? We are famous in this hospital for taking care of everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from. That's why I decided to work here with you," Eve told him. But the doctor's reply was not what the nurse expected. In fact, he didn't even bother to do so. Everything looks fine. In a couple of weeks we will be able to operate on you, Mr. Brown. Keep up the good work, and you should be back home soon," the doctor simply said in a cold and distant tone. He didn't even bother to look his patient in the eye as he spoke to him. And after leaving the folder with the patient's medical records on the table, he turned and left the room, leaving the nurse speechless and very puzzled by what had just happened. "Are you all right, honey?" asked the old man, seeing her worried face. The patient's voice made her react, and after apologizing to him, she went after the doctor to continue with the day's round of visits. Eve tried to continue with her tasks for the day without thinking about the little incident with that patient. But the reality was that she found it impossible. Throughout the day, and for the next few days, the nurse went over her superior's attitude in her mind again, not quite understanding what had led him to act in such a sudden way. A few days later, upon seeing Dr. Jordan again working with his usual sympathy with the rest of the patients and hospital workers, Eve decided to put the negative thoughts out of her mind and convinced herself that she had misread the signs and had seen problems where there were none. Unfortunately, Eve would soon discover that this first isolated accident would only be the beginning of a much bigger problem, of which she herself would be a part. The second sign that things were not going as well as she thought they were come during the days leading up to the elder Mr. Brown's heart surgery. Eve's day had started at 5 in the morning with hot coffee and avocado toast with scrambled eggs. It was the nurse's favorite breakfast and her ritual for starting the day in a good mood and with the energy needed for all the hours of hospital work ahead of her. But that day, not even such a full breakfast could keep Eve Nolan from running out of energy and feeling totally overwhelmed by the circumstances. Our nurse's morning went normally, except for the occasional emergency that prevented her from eating lunch during her half-hour break and taking a break for lunch. Eve is now used to eating poorly while working. Her co-workers didn't even complain, and for them, it was the norm not to eat properly until they finished their shift at the hospital. There is always someone who needs your help. The coffee and croissants can always wait, her partner in the cardiology nursing team, Steve, always told her. Steve had become the person Eve spent the most time with on a daily basis. The hospital and those who work there had become her only family, and her refuge when her personal life, boring and no social interaction, wasn't going as she had hoped. But sometimes, even family can turn their backs on us, and those we love and feel we know the most let us down deeply, making us feel totally alone. After lunch, things were not going to get better. In fact, they were going to get worse. A lot worse. Looking at her afternoon visitors board, Eve smiled as she saw that she had to stop by room 680. It was the room of the nice old man, Mr. Harry Brown, who was about to undergo heart surgery to save his life. That afternoon, Eve would have to do most of the visiting alone, as Dr. Jordan was in the operating room performing a delicate operation that would take many hours. This is my opportunity to assert myself and get to know the patients better. I will make Dr. Daniel feel very proud of me, and he will be able to see in me a reliable professional to whom he can delegate his responsibilities, thought the nurse, as she headed towards the first of her visits. Eve was right. That day she would have the opportunity to assert herself as a nurse and claim her importance in hospitals. But she could also prove to herself how brave she was and how important it was to stay true to herself. The first visiting hour passed normally, and Eve was on her way to the 6th floor to visit Mr. Brown. The old man was so pleasant and grateful to them that it was impossible not to take a liking to him. However, when Eve entered Harry Brown's room, she was met with a very different sight than she was used to. Firstly, Eve was very surprised to see that someone had already filled out and signed the visitor's sheet on each patient's door. Picking up the sheet and checking to see who had done it, Eve felt very confused. Dr. Daniel Jordan? The doctor has already been here? Why didn't anyone tell me? When did he come out of the operating room? She asked herself, very indignant to discover that her superior had acted on his own and had not even told her that he had finished the surgery earlier than expected. But that wouldn't be the most surprising thing Eve was to discover. Upon entering the room, Eve found a frightened Mr. Brown lying on the side of his bed. But that wasn't the most disturbing thing. As she approached the bed, the nurse smelled a strange, pungent, musty odor that made her cover her mouth. As she approached, Eve glanced around the rest of the room. It didn't take the nurse long to notice that something very strange had happened there. In a corner, against the small table next to Mr. Brown's bed, Eve saw something that would make her very worried. The patient's bedpan overturned on the floor. It looked as if someone had thrown it with force, causing the floor, the sheets, and even the wall to be covered with yellowish urine stains. On the floor, lying around anyway, was also the tray of food from that day. There were pieces of the beef stew with vegetables scattered all over the floor. The closer Eve got to the old man, the more afraid she became of what she might discover hidden in the sheets. "Mr. Brown, are you all right? Can you hear me?" asked the nurse in a trembling voice. The old man turned around with difficulty and sat up to look into her eyes. There was fear in his eyes, but above all, there was sadness. As she looked at him, Eve felt her heart sink, and the suspicion that something very bad was happening began to take hold of her. "Dearest, forgive me. I'm a clumsy old man. What a shame. I tried to do it all by myself, and I dropped everything on the floor," began Mr. Brown, although he didn't sound very convincing. Eve looked at him tenderly and tried to calm him down by telling him that nothing was wrong and that she would take care of picking everything up. However, the nurse could not resist the urge to ask him one more question. "Sorry to bother you with these questions, sir, but I would like to check something," said Eve, moving closer to the old man and speaking almost in whispers. "Ask, dear, ask. I am very old, but I can still solve a mystery or two," answered the old man a little more animated. "Dr. Jordan was here today. Was he the one who consulted you an hour ago?" asked Eve with a tone that made it clear that this was a very serious matter. Eve could tell how the old man's face darkened at the sound of the doctor's name. However, she was not going to find out any more that day. "Oh, yes, the kind Dr. Jordan has been here. It was just a moment, just a few minutes, to ask me how I was doing. He was as kind as ever. Is there anything else I can help you with, my dear?" said the old man, deflecting the conversation. Eve only insisted one more time before letting it go. "Have you been here during the lunch hour? Then you've seen what happened to the tray and the potty, haven't you?" she asked again, this time with a more urgent tone. The old man suddenly became serious and dodged the nurse's question. "You can leave me alone. I need to sleep. I have a little headache," said the old man in a quiet voice and without looking her in the eyes. That attitude was very suspicious and made Eve's fears increase much more. She decided to leave Mr. Brown alone and ordered his room to be cleaned and helped to clean him before continuing with her afternoon round of visits. "Of course, sir. I'll let you get some rest. I'll be back tomorrow to check on you before the operation," said Eve, saying goodbye and closing the door behind her. That afternoon, Eve still had 3 more visits to make, and then she could return home to rest after a very long day. 3 visits in which she could not get out of her head what she had just seen. The smell of the room, the things lying on the floor, and the pitiful state Harry Brown was in, and his attitude when she asked him about the doctor and what had happened. It was all very strange. Something strange was going on, and she had to find out. But what worried her most and made her suspicious was Dr. Jordan's mysterious visit a few hours earlier. He went to see the patient without telling her first, and just in the interval between his visit and hers, the accident of the food tray happened. Nothing of what she had seen and what the old man had explained to her seemed logical, especially considering that Dr. Daniel had been there shortly before her. It was 8 o'clock in the evening, and Eve was supposed to go home, but instead she decided to follow her intuition and pay a visit to her superior. Dr. Jordan still had 2 more hours of work, and she knew where she could find him. "Dr. Jordan, can we talk?" Eve began by saying when she saw her boss in the break room having a coffee. The tone of her voice was cold, and she didn't even bother to ask him how his surgery had gone that day. The doctor turned around in surprise and greeted her in a tired voice. "Oh, Eve, it's you. What do you want to talk about? I have a visitor in 5 minutes," he said. "It's about the patient who will have heart surgery in a couple of days, Mr. Brown. Something strange has happened that I would like to discuss with you," began the nurse. Eve explained what she had seen in the room and how strange it seemed to her that the patient was behaving that way. She also asked him about his unexpected, unannounced visit, and if he had seen anything that could explain what had happened. Suddenly, the doctor's attitude changed, and his usual smile and friendly tone disappeared. Eve expected her boss to give her some reassuring explanation, but what happened was just the opposite. "I'm tired of having to worry about patients like that. They are a waste of time and resources. He probably threw everything on himself. It's not that strange. He's old and clumsy. He must have thrown it all over himself and been embarrassed to keep bothering our nurses. That's all there is to it. And now I have work to attend to. Goodbye," the doctor answered coldly. Eve froze and did not know what to say. Such a cold attitude was not like her boss. Or was it? Whatever was going on, Eve wasn't going to stand idly by. Without thinking too much about what she was doing and following her intuition, Eve followed the doctor down the hallway. She didn't know why, but she felt she had to do it to discover the truth and find out if what she was suspecting about him was really true, or just her imagination. And she wasn't wrong. The doctor's next visit was on the 3rd floor, but instead of going there, the elevator went up to the 6th floor. The floor where Mr. Brown was. Eve ran up the stairs, and when she got to the top, she walked very slowly until she reached the old man's room. The door was already open, and there was someone talking to the patient. It was Dr. Jordan, and his tone of voice was not friendly. Eve moved as close as she could to listen to the conversation, and as she did, she felt her heart freeze. "I'm warning you. If you tell anyone what happened, I'll see to it myself that you never open your eyes again. You are scum, you and all of your race. Be thankful I don't kick you out of here and go save your life, because if it were up to me, I wouldn't even let you be occupying a bed. Keep your mouth shut, and everything will be fine," said Dr. Jordan in a threatening tone. Eve felt her blood boil at the injustice she had just witnessed. Dr. Jordan was not the sweet and charming person everyone thought he was, but a racist and cruel person who did not deserve to continue practicing medicine. With that thought and hiding so no one would see her, Eve picked up the phone and called 911 explaining everything that had happened, from the stains on the sheets and the dirt in the room, the death threat she had just heard. She told the police everything and didn't hesitate to report him to her superior so that the law would come down on him with full force. "We'll be right there. Don't move from there, Mrs. Nolan. We will need you to repeat your statement while we detain the suspect and also a witness," said one of the police officers on their way to the hospital. While waiting, Eve went into the old man's room and explained to him what she had just done. Mr. Brown first became very frightened and told her that he was not going to say anything against the doctor. Eve saw the fear in the old man's eyes and knew he was afraid the doctor would make good on the threat he had made a few minutes ago, but the nurse was not going to let Daniel Jordan get away with it, and managed to convince him to talk to the police and expose her boss. "You have nothing to fear. I am here with you. No one will do anything bad to you, and another doctor will take care of your heart operation. Everything will be fine, Mr. Brown. You deserve respect and to be treated like the rest of the patients," Eve told him in a reassuring tone. The old man agreed, and when the police arrived 20 minutes later, he and the nurse told them his version of events. The two police officers seemed to be very surprised by the story they were being told, and one of them, the older and more experienced one, even seemed not to believe what Eve was telling him about the doctor. Even so, both agents followed the protocol, and after taking their statements, they went in search of Dr. Daniel Jordan to interrogate him and let him know that they had reported him. The doctor's reaction was just what Eve expected. He denied everything and mocked her and the sick old man. "That nurse is just jealous of me and wants to move up the ranks quickly. And the old man? That man shouldn't even have the right to a bed in this hospital." "They are lying," said the doctor, looking angrily at Eve. But the nurse was not about to give up and be intimidated. She knew the doctor would deny everything and use his influence to make the cops think she was the one lying. That's why she had kept an ace up her sleeve. She had recorded everything the doctor had said to Mr. Brown with her cell phone. She knew she would need proof if she filed a formal complaint against him, and she did not hesitate to use it to prove that she was telling the truth, and that the man was a real monster. "Here is the proof that what I told you is true, and that doctor is lying to your face," Eve said to the agents, showing them the recording from her cell phone. As soon as the police saw the recording, Dr. Jordan ran out of arguments, and the apparent calm he had shown a few minutes before vanished, revealing his true personality. When the officers informed him that he was under arrest and put him in handcuffs in front of the whole hospital, the doctor went crazy and started insulting everyone, especially Eve and the elderly Mr. Brown, who was looking at him terrified from his wheelchair. "You don't know what you've just done. I'll end your career. You are all scum," shouted the doctor, threatening Eve. But Eve smiled, and with a triumphant gesture let him know that the only one who had ended his career was himself. "My conscience is very clear, sir. It is you who should reflect deeply on what you have done, and who will probably never practice medicine again. I have done the right thing, and people like you do not deserve to work in a hospital," Eve said calmly and smiling. Indeed, after that day, and Eve and the old man's accusation, Dr. Jordan never regained his medical license and spent several months in jail for what he had done. Word of his arrest and the nurse's heroic performance quickly spread throughout the hospital, making her the most wanted person for weeks and a symbol of resistance and justice for all.